Sussex, April 1815. The gown arrived at 6:30 in the evening, which left Ravenna Sable exactly 90 minutes to become someone she was not. It came in a box lined with tissue the color of cream, carried by a footman who did not know what he was delivering. The card pinned to the lid read simply, "For tonight. Wear it well." No signature. But Ravenna knew who had sent it, because only one woman in 3 counties possessed the combination of taste, audacity, and strategic generosity required to lend a merchant's daughter a gown worth more than her father's annual income. Lady Pemberton, 71 years old, widow of a viscount, architect of half the marriages in Sussex, and unapologetic about the other half. Ravenna lifted the gown from the box and held it against herself in the narrow mirror of her rented room above the milliner's shop on Kettering Lane. The silk was the color of a winter sky just before snow, pale and luminous, with a quality of light caught inside the fabric itself. The cut was severe and flawless, the neckline more elegant than anything she had ever worn, the waist defined by a single line of silver thread so fine it was almost invisible. It was not a gown that whispered. It was a gown that entered a room 30 seconds before the woman wearing it. She should not go. This was the sensible conclusion, and Ravenna Sable was, by necessity, a sensible woman. She was 25 years old, the daughter of Harland Sable, who had built a modest fortune importing textiles from the continent, and who had died 14 months ago, leaving her that fortune, a warehouse in Portsmouth, and the quiet contempt of every family in Sussex who believed that money earned was fundamentally different from money inherited. She had no title, no connections beyond Lady Pemberton's inexplicable patronage, and no illusions about what happened to women like her at events hosted by men like the Duke of Ashworth. The Duke of Ashworth, Benedict Calloway, 32 years old, unmarried, possessed of 12,000 acres of Sussex countryside, and the reputation of a man who had been disappointed by something significant and had organized the disappointment into a personality. He was hosting a spring ball, the first at Ashworth Hall in 3 years. The last had been before his broken engagement to Lady Isabel Fenton, who had left him for a cavalry officer 4 months before the wedding, and had done it publicly enough that the county still discussed it with the enthusiasm reserved for other people's misfortunes. He had not entertained since. He had not shown interest in any woman since. He had retreated into his estate, his tenants, his accounts, and the precise, controlled life of a man who no longer included the possibility of being surprised. Lady Pemberton had told Ravenna all of this over tea on Tuesday, with the efficiency of a woman delivering military intelligence. He needs to remember that the world contains women worth looking at, Lady Pemberton had said, stirring her tea with a silver spoon that had belonged to Queen Charlotte. And you, my dear, need to walk into a room that will not expect you and decline to apologize for being there. I was not invited, Ravenna had said. You are my guest, Lady Pemberton had replied. I am invited everywhere. It is the single remaining privilege of being old, rich, and in possession of secrets about every family in the county. Now Ravenna stood with the borrowed gown against her body and considered what it meant to walk into a room full of people who had decided what she was before she arrived. She had spent 14 months in careful, quiet competence, running her father's warehouse, negotiating with suppliers who assumed a woman with no husband was a woman with no authority, building something real and functional while the county watched from behind its curtains and formed its opinions. She considered the word, place, and where hers was, and who had the right to assign it. She put on the gown. It fit as though it had been made for her, which, knowing Lady Pemberton, it almost certainly had been. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman she recognized, but had not met before. The same dark hair, the same direct gray eyes, the same jawline that her mother had called determined and her father had called stubborn, but framed differently, presented with the confidence of a garment designed by someone who understood that clothes were not decoration, but argument. She arrived at Ashworth Hall at 8 in Lady Pemberton's carriage, with Lady Pemberton beside her, radiating composed satisfaction. The hall was lit with 500 candles. The drive was lined with carriages. The entrance was flanked by footmen in the Ashworth livery, dark green and gold, and the sound of the orchestra reached them before the doors opened. The doors opened. Ravenna stepped into the light, and the immediate, comprehensive attention of 160 people who had not expected her. Conversations shifted, glances redirected. Fans moved to cover mouths already forming assessments. The name Sable passed through the room like a current through water, carrying with it everything the county knew and everything it assumed, which were entirely different things. She felt it all. She had been reading rooms since she was 19, when her father's illness had first required her to stand in for him at trade meetings, and she had developed the ability to gauge the temperature of a gathering within 10 seconds of entering it. This room was surprised. This room was recalculating. And the Duke of Ashworth was standing at the far end of the ballroom, near the tall windows that overlooked the south garden, and he was watching her with an expression she could not yet read from this distance, but was going to have to account for before the evening was finished. Lady Pemberton squeezed her arm. "Chin up," she said. "You are exactly where you are supposed to be." Ravenna looked at the borrowed gown and the room full of people who had not borrowed anything in their lives, and she thought, "We will see about that." The first hour passed in the particular rhythm of a ball, where everyone was performing. Lady Pemberton introduced her to the county, the Fenwick family, who were polite. Sir Aldous Crane, who was elderly and kind, and talked about his roses for 12 minutes, without pausing for breath. Mrs. Hargrove, who assessed her gown with the professional eye of a woman who spent £3,000 a year on clothes and recognized quality when she saw it. And Lord Ashby, a baronet of 56, who looked at her gown and then at her face, and said, with the smile of a man who believed charm was a substitute for respect, "Miss Sable, what a delightful surprise. I had no idea Lady Pemberton's circle extended to the commercial quarter." Ravenna held his gaze. "My father imported the silk that made your wife's curtains, Lord Ashby. I believe she ordered them in 1812, the blue damask. Your wife has excellent taste." Lord Ashby's smile underwent a minor adjustment. Lady Pemberton made a sound that might have been a cough and was almost certainly a laugh. The Duke appeared at 11. He materialized beside Lady Pemberton with the quiet authority of a man who moved through his own house without requiring announcement. He was taller than she had expected from across the room, his face harder, the bones more defined, the expression more controlled. He had the look of a man who had once been easy to read and had since taken considerable trouble not to be. "Lady Pemberton," he said. "Benedict," Lady Pemberton replied, with the familiarity of a woman who had known him since before he could walk. "You are neglecting your guests. You have been standing by the windows for an hour looking severe." "I have been observing," he said. "You have been hiding. This is Miss Ravenna Sable, Harland Sable's daughter. She manages the Sable textile concern in Portsmouth. She is wearing my gown, which I mention because you have been studying it since she arrived and should know that the credit for the selection is mine." The Duke turned to Ravenna. She held his gaze without adjusting it, without softening it, without performing the small expected recalibrations that women were supposed to offer men of his rank as a matter of course. "Miss Sable," he said. "Your Grace," she said. There was a pause. Not an awkward one. The pause of two people taking accurate measurements of each other, which required a moment and deserved one. "You are in trade," he said. "I am in textiles," she said. "The distinction matters to me, if not to the county." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not a smile. The place where a smile would go if he permitted one. "Lady Pemberton tells me you manage the business yourself, without a husband or a partner or a male representative of any kind." "Without any of those things," she confirmed. "The suppliers were skeptical at first. They have since revised their position." "The county considers your father's operation modest," he said. "My father's business was sound," she said. "It is no longer modest. I have expanded the operation considerably since his death. The assessment the county offers is approximately 18 months out of date." "You are very direct," he said. "You asked a direct question," she said. "I assumed you wanted a direct answer. If you preferred something decorative, I can provide that as well. But it would take longer and contain less information." The Duke said, "Miss Sable, would you do me the honor of a dance?" The room heard this. 160 people registered that the Duke of Ashworth, who had not danced with anyone at a public occasion in 3 years, had just asked the daughter of a textile merchant to dance, in a borrowed gown. "I would," she said. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked onto the floor, and every man in the room watched her cross it, and several of them, for a moment that their wives would later note and discuss at length, forgot entirely what they had been saying. The morning after the ball, the county talked. This was expected. Sussex processed its information through conversation, the way other counties processed it through newspapers. And by noon on Tuesday, the story of the borrowed gown and the Duke's dance had been told, retold, analyzed, and assigned meaning by every household within 15 miles of Ashworth Hall. Ravenna heard none of it. She was at the warehouse in Portsmouth by 7, reviewing an invoice from a supplier in Lyon, who had attempted to renegotiate terms on the assumption that her attention had been elsewhere. She corrected the invoice, sent a reply that was brief and factual, and contained within it the precise dimensions of the mistake, and spent the rest of the morning running the operation with the focused energy of a woman who understood that the borrowed gown was one evening and the warehouse was every morning. But she considered the dance. She turned it over with the precision she brought to contracts and supplier negotiations, examining what it meant and what it did not mean, and what the Duke had intended by it. The dance itself had been formal, a quadrille, the kind that kept partners at a regulated distance and allowed conversation only in measured intervals. He had said very little during it. She had said less. But the quality of the silence between them had been particular, the silence of two people who were both thinking and were both aware that the other was thinking and had decided, without discussing it, to let the thinking happen before the talking resumed. Lady Pemberton called on Wednesday. She arrived at the rented room above the milliner's shop with the energy of a woman who had been restraining herself for 36 hours and had reached her limit. "Well," she said, settling into the only good chair with the authority of 71 years of practice. "Well," Ravenna said, "he danced with you. Oh, he has not danced with anyone in 3 years." "It was one dance," Ravenna said, "at a ball. It does not constitute a declaration. It constitutes an earthquake," Lady Pemberton said, "in a county where the ground has not moved in 3 years." She accepted her tea. "What did you make of him?" Ravenna considered the question with care. "He is direct," she said. "He asked about the business. He did not pretend the question was about something else, and he did not apologize for asking it." "And?" "And he has been hurt," she said. "Not recently, but the architecture of it is still visible. He has organized himself around the absence of something, and he is very good at the organization, and I do not think he knows that the organization itself is the tell." Lady Pemberton set down her cup. She studied Ravenna with an expression that had moved beyond strategic satisfaction into something closer to recognition. "You saw all of that in one dance," she said. "I saw all of that in the first 10 minutes, Ravenna said. The dance confirmed it. Lady Pemberton was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He will call on you." Ravenna looked at her. "He will not call on a woman in a rented room above a milliner's shop. He is a duke. He will call," Lady Pemberton said, "because you are the first person in 3 years who has looked at him without performing. And he noticed, and he is not a man who fails to act on what he notices." She paused. "The question is what you will do when he does." Ravenna turned the dance over in her mind. She turned the silence in it. She turned to the image of a man who had retreated from the world and had come back into it for one evening and had chosen her, out of 160 people, to be direct with. "I will be at the warehouse," she said. "If he wants to find me, he can find me where I work." Lady Pemberton smiled. Not the social smile, the one that meant the game had become genuinely interesting. He found her at the warehouse. It was a Thursday, 9 days after the ball, and Ravenna was in the back office with a shipping manifest spread across the desk and ink on her right hand, and the kind of focused concentration that made her deaf to everything except the numbers. She did not hear the carriage. She did not hear the footsteps. She heard her foreman, Gareth, clear his throat in the doorway with the particular emphasis of a man who had something to say and was not sure how to say it. "There is a gentleman here, Miss Sable," Gareth said. He paused. "A specific gentleman." Ravenna looked up. Gareth's expression told her everything the pause had not. She set down her pen. She did not check her hair. She did not adjust her dress, which was her working dress. Dark wool, practical, stained at the cuff from ink, the kind of dress that said, "Function without apology." She stood and walked into the warehouse floor, and the Duke of Ashworth was standing between 2 bolts of lion silk, studying her operation with thorough, unhurried attention. He was dressed for riding, not for a social call. His coat was practical. His boots had been used for actual riding. He had come directly, without the performance of preparation, which told her something about what this visit meant to him. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Sable," he said. He looked at the warehouse around him, the stacked bolts of fabric, the inventory ledgers, the 2 clerks who had stopped working and were staring at him with the paralyzed attention of men who had never seen a duke in a textile warehouse. "I apologize for arriving without notice." "You are welcome here," she said. "Though I should tell you that the last person of rank who visited this warehouse was a customs inspector, and he was considerably less well-dressed." He walked through the warehouse with her. She showed him the operation because he asked, and because his questions were specific and informed, and revealed a man who understood supply and logistics the way a landowner who ran 12,000 acres would understand them. He asked about the lion supplier. He asked about the shipping routes. He asked about the margins, which was a question no one of his rank had ever asked her, and which she answered honestly, because she had decided in the ballroom that honesty was the only register available to her with this man. They stood in the back office for 20 minutes. She showed him the ledgers. He read them with the quick, intent focus of a person who processed numbers as naturally as words. He asked one question about the depreciation on the warehouse lease that revealed he had done the calculation in his head before she finished the sentence. "You are profitable," he said. "Not modest. Your description at the ball was accurate. I do not offer inaccurate descriptions," she said. He considered her across the desk with the ink stain on the wood and the shipping manifest between them and the smell of raw silk and packing straw in the air, and said, "I came because I have been considering what you said at the ball." "Which part?" "The part about the county's assessment being 18 months out of date," he said. "I realized that my own assessment was similarly outdated. I came to correct it." She held his gaze. "And have you?" I have revised it considerably, he said. The revision is ongoing. She weighed this. She weighed a man who had come to a warehouse in Portsmouth in his riding clothes because he wanted to see what was real rather than what was presented, and who had read her ledgers with the attention they deserved, and who had just told her, in his own particular language, that he was paying attention. The revision is welcome, she said. The warehouse is open Monday through Saturday. The ledgers are available for inspection at any time. I have nothing to hide, and nothing to perform. He held her gaze a moment longer than the conversation required. "Good morning, Miss Sable," he said. "Good morning, Your Grace." He left. She stood in the back office with the shipping manifest and the particular silence that followed a significant conversation, and she went back to work. She did not dwell on the expression he wore when he departed, the one that was no longer the ballroom assessment, but something less guarded than that. She dwelled on it anyway. The letter arrived on a Monday. It was written in his hand, which she recognized from the single note he had sent after the warehouse visit. This letter was longer. Miss Sable, the County Road Commission is considering a proposal to reroute the Petworth Road through the south boundary of the Ashworth estate. The proposed route would cross land adjacent to the Portsmouth Harbor Road and would affect the transport route your warehouse relies upon for overland shipments. I have reviewed the proposal and have concerns about its feasibility. I suspect you will have concerns about its commercial impact. I propose a meeting to review the documents together. Thursday next, 10 in the morning, at the boundary marker, where the Ashworth land meets the Harbor Road. Bring the shipping schedules. I will bring the survey maps. Ashworth. She read the letter twice. She noted the precision. She noted the absence of anything personal. She noted that he had identified a threat to her business before she had, which meant he had been studying her shipping routes. And she noted that he had asked her to meet him at a boundary, not at his house, and not at hers. Neutral ground. The choice of a man who understood that the location of a conversation shaped its terms. She sent back, Thursday next. 10. I will bring the schedules. R. Sable. Thursday was the kind of April morning that Sussex produced when it wanted to be taken seriously. Bright and sharp, the light falling clean across the fields. She arrived at the boundary marker at 5 minutes to 10. He was already there, on foot, the survey maps under his arm, and he had brought his land agent, a man named Croft, who had the weathered competence of someone who had been handling the practical details of aristocratic ownership for 30 years. She had brought her shipping clerk, Nolan, who had the ledgers and the quietly astonished expression of a man who had not expected his morning to involve standing in a field with a duke. They spread the documents on the flat stone wall, his survey maps on one side, her shipping schedules on the other, and they stood on opposite sides of the wall and read each other's evidence with the focused attention of two people who were both entirely correct about the problem and approaching it from entirely different positions. The proposed route adds half a day to any shipment moving between Portsmouth and the northern markets, he said. I have calculated the cost, she said. The reroute would reduce my margins by 11% in the first year and 14% by the third. I also calculated the impact on your estate. The new road would require the commission to purchase a strip of your south pasture at a price the county will undervalue by approximately 30%. He studied her for a moment that stretched. You calculated the impact on my estate. The problem affects both of us, she said. I find it more efficient to understand both sides of a negotiation before entering it. We should present a joint objection to the commission, he said. Your commercial data and my survey evidence together make a stronger case than either alone. You are proposing an alliance, a duke and a textile merchant, presenting jointly to a county commission. You understand what the county will make of that. I find I am less interested in what the county makes of things than I used to be. The April wind moved through the hedgerow behind them. She weighed the documents. She weighed the man across from her, who had identified a threat to her livelihood and had come to her with evidence and a plan, and had proposed standing beside her in a public forum, which wasn't a small thing for a man of his position, and which he had offered without making her ask. "I accept," she said, "on the condition that the objection reflects my commercial analysis as an equal submission, not as an appendix to your survey." "Agreed," he said. She extended her hand across the boundary wall. He shook it with the brief, firm grip of a man who meant what he agreed to. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said. "Good morning, Miss Sable." She walked back to the road with Nolan and the shipping schedules, and the satisfaction of a woman who had held her ground and been met with something she had not expected. Respect offered without conditions, an alliance proposed without hierarchy. The County Commission met on the first Monday of May in the assembly room of the Crown Inn at Petworth. 9 commissioners, 8 landowners. The 9th was a solicitor named Whitfield. Lord Ashby was among the 8, which Ravenna noted with the automatic attention she brought to rooms, and which explained a great deal about the proposed reroute, because the new road would increase the value of a parcel of land Ashby owned on the northern edge of the route by a considerable margin. She had discovered this on Friday. She had not yet told the Duke because she wanted to confirm the details before presenting them. Presenting unconfirmed intelligence was a habit she had eliminated from her practice at the age of 21, when an unverified rumor about a supplier had cost her father £200 and a valuable relationship. The Duke arrived at 5 minutes to 10. He was dressed formally, the Ashworth title operating at its full weight. He sat beside Ravenna without comment, which was itself a comment, because a duke choosing to sit beside a merchant's daughter at a county commission was a statement that required no additional language. When objections were invited, the Duke stood and presented the survey evidence with economy and precision. The proposed route would cross productive agricultural land. The compensation was below market value. The engineering assessment had not accounted for the drainage patterns in the south field. He sat down. Ravenna stood. The room adjusted. 9 men and a duke watched a woman in a dark wool working dress stand before a county commission and present a commercial analysis that none of them had expected, and most of them were not prepared for. She presented the shipping data. She presented the cost projections, 11% in year 1, 14% by year 3. Specific, documented, sourced from her own ledgers. She presented the impact on employment, 3 warehouse positions, and 2 transport contracts that would become unviable. She presented all of it with the steady directness that was her natural way, without apology, without performance, without the small adjustments of tone that women were expected to offer in rooms full of men as a concession to the atmosphere. Lord Ashby interrupted her. "Miss Sable," he said, with the smile she recognized from the ballroom, the one that believed charm was interchangeable with authority. "These are commercial concerns. The Commission's mandate is the public interest, not the private profit of individual merchants." He paused. However capable those merchants might be. The word capable did the work he had designed it to do. In his mouth, with his pause and his audience, it meant, "You are out of your depth, and everyone here knows it." She was formulating a precise, factual dismantling of his position when the Duke spoke. The commercial impact on the Portsmouth shipping route, the Duke said in a voice she had not heard before, the one beneath all the others, the one that carried 200 years of Sussex and knew exactly what weight it held, affects the supply of textiles to every market north of London. Miss Sable's analysis demonstrates that the proposed route would damage not a private interest, but a regional commerce network that employs considerably more people than Lord Ashby's parcel of undeveloped land on the northern boundary. The Commission may wish to consider whether the public interest is best served by a route that benefits one landowner at the cost of an established commercial operation. I believe Miss Sable's data speaks to that question with some clarity. The room was quiet. Lord Ashby's smile collapsed. The proposal was tabled for further review, which was the polite language of a commission that had been shown it was wrong and needed time to find a way to admit it. Ravenna stood beside the Duke in the aftermath and weighed what had just happened. He had not rescued her. Her data was sound, and her argument was complete. But he had done something more precise than rescue. He had connected her analysis to his own authority, not above hers, but alongside it, in a way that made it impossible for Ashby to dismiss either of them without dismissing both. Outside the commission, in the May morning, she said, "Thank you." The commercial data was conclusive, he said. The outcome would have been the same without my contribution. Perhaps, she said, but the room would have taken longer to reach it, and Ashby would have had time to make it personal before the evidence prevailed. You removed that possibility. Ashby's interest in the northern parcel, he said. You knew about it. I confirmed it on Friday. I was going to present it if the commission had not tabled the proposal. You came prepared to fight the entire commission alone. I came prepared to present accurate information to a decision-making body, she said. I do not consider that fighting. I consider it commerce. The thing at the corner of his mouth moved. It was closer to a smile than anything she had seen from him. The county dinners began to include her. This was Lady Pemberton's doing, executed with the patient strategy of a woman who understood that social change in Sussex operated on the same principles as soil erosion, slowly, invisibly, and irreversibly, if given enough time. The first invitation came from the Fenwick family. Ravenna attended in a gown she owned, dark gray silk purchased in London, and sat at Mrs. Fenwick's table and talked about the shipping industry with Sir Aldous Crane for 30 minutes, because Sir Aldous had discovered that his interest in roses extended to imported fertilizers her warehouse occasionally handled, and he wanted to know everything. She was aware during the conversation with Sir Aldous that the Duke was at the same dinner. He was at the far end of the table, attending to his portion of the evening with practiced precision. But she had developed over the weeks since the ball a working understanding of where his attention was directed, and it was, with a frequency she noted and did not discuss, directed at her. The second dinner was at the Hargrove house, where she was seated 3 places from the Duke and talked to Croft, his land agent, about drainage improvements she had observed on the Ashworth South Field. She told Croft they were well designed because she believed in acknowledging good work regardless of whose estate it was on. The Duke listened to this conversation. She knew because she had learned to identify the difference between his social attention and his actual attention, and the conversation with Croft had received the actual variety. The third dinner was at Ashworth Hall itself. 20 guests, the full Sussex establishment. Ravenna seated at the Duke's right, which was where the most important guest belonged, and which Lady Pemberton, 4 places down, observed with quiet triumph. At the end of the Ashworth dinner, in the entrance hall, Lady Pemberton appeared at her elbow. "He is different when you are in the room," Lady Pemberton said. "He is the same," Ravenna said. "He is simply doing less of the performance." Lady Pemberton studied her nephew across the hall, who was seeing the last guests to their carriages with the formal warmth of a host, concluding a successful evening. "He has not been this way since before Isabel," she said. "Since before he decided that being careful was the same as being safe." She turned to Ravenna. "Those are not the same thing." "I'm aware of the distinction," Ravenna said. "Are you? Because he is beginning to be. And the question is whether you will let him act on it, or whether you will both continue discussing shipping routes and drainage improvements as a substitute for the conversation you are actually having." "Lady Pemberton," Ravenna said with the steady directness that was her natural way, "I am a merchant's daughter in a borrowed social position. He is a duke who was publicly humiliated by the last woman he trusted. The distance between us is not a failure of communication. It is an accurate assessment of the situation. My dear, Lady Pemberton said, I have spent 71 years watching people make accurate assessments of impossible situations, and then doing the impossible thing anyway. The assessments are never wrong. They are merely incomplete. She patted Ravenna's arm. Good evening, Miss Sable. The gown is yours, by the way. I had it made for you. I was never going to ask for it back. She left. Ravenna stood in the entrance hall and considered a borrowed gown that had never been borrowed, and assessments, and their incompleteness, and a man across the hall who was watching her with an expression that had nothing of the ballroom in it anymore, the one that had been building since the warehouse and the boundary wall and the commission. The one she had been tracking and was now going to have to stop pretending was merely observation. The commission formally rejected the road proposal on the 14th of May, the tabled review having concluded in their favor, which was the outcome they had both expected, and which arrived with the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved by evidence rather than argument. The Duke wrote to her about it. His letter contained a paragraph about the Southfield drainage at Ashworth that he wanted her opinion on, because the engineering question resembled one her warehouse had solved with the Portsmouth loading dock the previous autumn, and he had remembered her describing it, which meant he had been listening to a conversation she had assumed was incidental and had stored it as relevant. She wrote back. Her letter began with drainage and ended with a question about the lion silk tariff that his knowledge of county trade policy might illuminate. His reply came the following morning, which was faster than she had expected, and which was written in his own hand rather than a secretary's. They exchanged 4 letters in May, then 6 in June. The letters grew longer. They grew less formal. The salutation moved from Miss Sable to Ravenna on the 12th of June in a letter about the summer shipping schedule that had, in its 3rd paragraph, moved from commerce to a description of the light on the Ashworth Southfield at 6 in the morning that was not about agriculture and was not pretending to be. She read that paragraph 3 times. She wrote back describing the light on Portsmouth Harbor at dawn, the way the water held the sky in it before the ships moved, and she did not pretend it was about shipping. He came to the warehouse on a Tuesday in late June without announcement. He arrived in his riding clothes, as he had the first time, and found her in the back office with the summer inventory. She did not check her hair. He did not apologize for arriving without notice. They had both stopped performing these particular courtesies sometime in May, without either of them marking the moment it happened. He sat in the chair across her desk. She poured tea from the pot she kept on the shelf. He drank it without comment, the first time he had accepted anything at the warehouse, and they talked about the inventory, and then about the summer social calendar, and then about a book on maritime trade she had on the shelf that he had also read, and had opinions about that she disagreed with, specifically and articulately, for 20 minutes. It was the first time they had argued, not about land or commerce or commissions, but about ideas, about the interpretation of a passage neither was willing to concede, and the argument had the quality of a conversation between 2 people who respected each other enough to disagree without softening it, and who found the experience of being matched more engaging than the experience of being agreed with. He stayed for an hour. When he left, he paused at the warehouse door and looked back at her across the floor with an expression that had completed its journey from the ballroom assessment to something she could no longer observe from a distance, because it was no longer something she was outside of. It was something she was participating in. "Good afternoon, Ravenna," he said. "Good afternoon, Benedict," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. It entered the warehouse and settled between them with the weight of something that could not be taken back, and neither of them attempted to take it back. And he left, and she stood in the back office with the tea and the book and the inventory, and did not go back to work for 7 minutes. He came to the warehouse on a Friday morning in early July, and something had shifted. She saw it immediately. The way she saw everything about him now, with the fluency of someone who had been reading the same text for 3 months and no longer needed to sound out the words. The guarded quality was back, the one he wore when he was controlling a situation rather than inhabiting it, and it told her that whatever he had come to say had cost him something to decide. She sent Nolan and Gareth to the loading dock. She closed the office door. She sat behind her desk and waited, because she had learned that his important things arrived in their own time and could not be hurried. "I owe you something," he said. He was standing by the window, studying the harbor rather than her. "Something I should have said before now." She waited. "At the ball," he said. "The first evening, when I asked you to dance. I did not ask because Lady Pemberton suggested it. I did not ask because the gown was striking, or because the room was watching. I asked because you answered my question about your business without adjusting your voice or your posture or a single word to accommodate my rank. You spoke to me as though I were a person rather than a title, and I realized in that moment that I had not been spoken to that way in 3 years, and that I had missed it so profoundly that the recognition of it was—" He stopped. "Was what?" she said. "Was the first time since Isabel that I felt something I had not planned to feel," he said, "and I handled it by treating you as a commercial interest. I came to the warehouse and asked about your margins. I proposed an alliance and framed it as strategy. I have spent 3 months converting everything I feel about you into the language of business, because business was the only register I trusted myself to operate in without." He stopped again. "Without what?" "Without being hurt again," he said. He turned from the window. He was looking at her with an expression that had nothing guarded in it, nothing controlled, nothing organized around the absence of something. Just presence, full and undefended and entirely vulnerable. "I was wrong," he said. "Not about what I said, but about what I withheld. I looked at you, and I saw someone extraordinary, and I immediately began constructing a system to contain it, because the last time I saw someone extraordinary, I was destroyed by the experience. And I decided that if I kept you inside the system, inside the letters and the commissions and the commercial language, then I could have you in my life without risking the part of my life that Isabel had ruined." He paused. "That was not honesty. That was control. And you deserve honesty." Ravenna considered him across the desk with the ink stain and the tea and the summer inventory, and 3 months of letters between them that had said everything except this. "I know," she said. He studied her. "I have known since the warehouse," she said. "The first visit. You came in your riding clothes and asked about my ledgers, and I understood exactly what you were doing. You were making me legible. You were converting me into data you could process without it threatening the system you had built to protect yourself." She met his gaze. I did not object, because I was doing the same thing. I tracked the increments of your attention. I turned you into an observation because observations are safe and feelings are not. And I have been alone for 14 months running a business that requires me to be competent every single day. And competence does not leave room for the kind of vulnerability you are describing." She paused. "So when you say you owe me something, I want you to know that the debt is mutual. I have been equally dishonest. I have been equally afraid." He was quiet for a long moment. The harbor sounds came through the window, the calls of the dock workers, the creak of rigging, the ordinary world continuing while something extraordinary happened in a back office above a textile warehouse. "Ravenna," he said. "Benedict," she said. He came around the desk. She stood, because this was not a conversation for sitting, and they were very close in the small office with the summer light through the window and 3 months of careful distance between them that had just been dismantled in 5 minutes. "I am not Isabel," she said. "I am not going to leave." "I know," he said. I have known it since the commission, since you came prepared to fight an entire room alone, and did not need me, but let me stand beside you anyway." She put her hand on his arm. It was flat and deliberate, the same way she signed contracts and shook hands and did every true thing she had ever decided. He covered her hand with his. They looked at each other without anything guarded or controlled or converted into safe language between them. He kissed her. It was not tentative. It had the honesty of a man who had spent 3 months revising his position and had arrived at a conclusion he was prepared to act on. She kissed him back with the same precision she brought to every decision that mattered, and the office was warm, and the harbor was outside, and the inventory was still on the desk, and none of it required further attention. He proposed on a Wednesday in the warehouse over the shipping schedules, which was so entirely consistent with the way they had conducted the entire relationship that she laughed when he did it. A small, real, unguarded laugh that she had not heard from herself in 14 months. "I am not proposing over shipping schedules," he said. "I am proposing in the place where you are most yourself. The schedules are incidental." "They are not incidental," she said. "They are the August projections, and they are due to the Lion office by Friday. Will you marry me?" She considered the warehouse around her, the bolts of silk, the ledgers, the desk, the world she had built from her father's modest operation into something considerable and entirely her own. She considered the man who had entered that world and learned its language and stood beside her at a commission and written her letters about morning light and kissed her in this office with the honesty of someone who had decided that being vulnerable was worth more than being safe. "Yes," she said. He took her hand. He held it with the grip she knew, brief and firm, and meaning exactly what it agreed to. "Lady Pemberton has been informed," he said. "She claims to have known since the ball. I do not doubt her. Ravenna's father was dead. She could not tell him. This was the one sharp edge of the morning, the absence inside the happiness like a stone in a shoe, present and unignorable. She considered Harlan Sable, who had built this warehouse and trained her to run it, and who had said, once, when she was 19, and handling her first supplier negotiation alone, "The ones who underestimate you are giving you an advantage. Never correct them until the contract is signed." She believed he would have liked Benedict. She believed he would have looked at the Duke's riding boots in the textile warehouse and the ink on both their hands and the shipping schedules between them and said, with quiet satisfaction, "Sound investment." Lady Pemberton arrived at 3 in the afternoon, which meant she had been waiting for the news and had exercised restraint for approximately 4 hours, which was a personal record. "Well," she said. "Well," Ravenna said. "He's happy," Lady Pemberton said. "I have not seen him happy in 3 years. He shows it very quietly and entirely without announcement. But it is there." She studied Ravenna. "You are good for him." "He is good for me," Ravenna said, "which is the thing I did not expect." "What did you expect?" "I expected to prove a point," Ravenna said. "I expected to walk into that ballroom and decline to be invisible and make it impossible for the county to maintain its assessment of me. I expected to be right." She paused. "I did not expect to discover that he was also right about certain things, and that the things he was right about were the things that made him worth the argument." "What was he right about?" "That a woman who knows her own worth," Ravenna said, "is worth knowing." He had entirely the wrong way of recognizing it, but the instinct was not wrong. The engagement dinner was held at Ashworth Hall on the 20th of July, which was a Friday, which Lady Pemberton had chosen because Friday dinners in Sussex were the ones that carried weight, and she wanted this one to carry the precise amount. 30 guests. The full county. Ravenna was at Benedict's right. She wore the gown. The original one, the winter sky silk, the one Lady Pemberton had made for her and called borrowed, and then given back. She wore it because it was the beginning of the story, and she wanted the room to see the full arc, from the woman who had arrived in a gown she believed was lent to the woman who sat at the Duke's right, in a gown she knew was hers. Benedict studied her when she sat down. "The winter sky," he said. "It seemed appropriate," she said. "It is," he said. He looked at her with the expression she was now permitted to keep, the one that had completed its journey from assessment to something that required no observation and no system. "You are going to be very difficult to be married to," he said. "Is that a complaint?" "It is a preliminary assessment," he said. "I find assessments useful before major commitments." "As do I," she said. "My preliminary assessment is that you are going to find it considerably harder to maintain your systems around someone who has read all your ledgers and can identify every tell you possess. I have noticed that my systems have been performing poorly since approximately April." "They have been performing very badly," she said. "I would recommend a wholesale revision." "I'm in the process of one," he said. Lord Ashby congratulated them after dinner with the grace of a man who had exhausted his alternatives and was making the best of the situation. He said the correct things. He said them to Benedict first, and then to Ravenna, and when he met her eyes, she met his with the steady directness that was her natural way, and nothing further was required. Benedict beside her said nothing. He did not need to. His presence was the statement. They were married in August at the church in the village between Ashworth and Portsmouth, which was geographically convenient and practically sound, and also, Ravenna had noted, when she first saw it in June, a beautiful church with good windows and a stone floor that had been there since the 15th century. She wore the winter sky gown. Not a new one. The same one. Lady Pemberton had offered to commission something for the occasion, and Ravenna had declined, because the gown was the beginning, and she wanted it to also be this, and because Benedict had once looked at it across a ballroom and asked her to dance, and she wanted him to look at it again and know how far they had both traveled since. Sussex turned out, 30 people from the engagement dinner and a considerable number beyond them, because the marriage of a duke was an occasion, and the marriage of this duke to this woman was an occasion with the additional quality of a story the county had been following since April, with the invested attention of people who had known something was going to happen and had not been entirely sure what. Ravenna walked in on her own. She had no father to give her away, and she had decided, with the directness that was her natural way, that she would not borrow an arm any more than she had borrowed the gown. She would walk into this church the way she had walked into the ballroom, the way she had walked into the commission, the way she had walked into every room that had not expected her, on her own terms. Benedict watched her come down the aisle. She saw his face, and saw in it the complete absence of everything that had been there in April. No assessment, no guarding, no system built to contain what he felt. Just him, entirely present. Looking at the woman who had walked into his ballroom in a gown she believed was borrowed, and had argued with him about a book, and corrected his shipping knowledge, and stood beside him at a commission, and kissed him in a warehouse, and said yes over the August projections. She reached him. She took his hand, the way she signed contracts, flat and deliberate, and meaning exactly what it meant. He held it. He did not let go. The wedding breakfast was at Ashworth Hall, and Ravenna moved through it with the ease of a woman on ground that was now hers in every sense that mattered. She talked with the Fenwicks, and Sir Aldous, and Croft, and Whitfield. She talked with Lady Pemberton, who had the expression of a woman whose long game had concluded better than even she had predicted, and who was exercising restraint about it with visible effort. She talked with Gareth, her foreman, who had come from Portsmouth in a coat that was clearly new, and who looked at the Ashworth dining room with the expression of a man handling unfamiliar territory, with the same quiet competence he brought to the warehouse floor. "The warehouse will be open Monday," she told him. He looked at her. "Monday, miss." He paused. "Your Grace." "Monday," she said. "And it is still Miss Sable at the warehouse. The title is for this house. The warehouse is mine." Benedict found her in the East Garden as the afternoon light moved across the Sussex countryside in the long, golden way of August evenings that did not want to end. She was studying the rose beds, which had been planted by a previous duchess and maintained with varying degrees of attention since, and she was already redesigning them. "The roses," he said. "They are in the wrong beds," she said. "The climbers should be on the south wall. The standards should be reorganized by bloom sequence, and the drainage in the east border is inadequate. I can see it from here." He considered her. She was standing in the garden of a house that was now hers, in the gown that had started everything, with the August light on her face and the practical attention of a woman who had already identified 3 things she intended to change and was not going to wait for permission to change them. "The roses are yours," he said. "All of it. The garden and the south field and the hall and the warehouse, and whatever you decide to do with any of it. I want you to know that I know that." She studied the roses. She studied the man who had asked her to dance in a borrowed gown and had come to her warehouse in his riding clothes and had proposed over shipping schedules and had told her, in a back office with the harbor outside the window, that he was done converting what he felt into safe language. "Benedict," she said. "Yes. I walked into your ballroom in April in a gown I believed was borrowed," she said, "and every assumption I made that evening was wrong. I assumed the gown was temporary. I assumed the evening was singular. I assumed that a merchant's daughter and a duke occupied positions so distant that the space between them could only be crossed by performance." She held his gaze. "Every one of those assumptions was incorrect. The gown was mine. The evening was a beginning, and the distance between us was not a distance at all. It was a boundary that neither of us had tested, and when we tested it, it did not exist." He studied her with the expression that had nothing left to guard, nothing left to revise. The expression of a man who had spent 3 months converting the most important experience of his life into safe language, and had finally, irreversibly, stopped. She stepped toward him. He met her in the middle of the East Garden, between the rose beds that needed moving, and the long August light, and the Ashworth chimneys above them, and the road to Portsmouth, visible in the distance. The warehouse and the hall, and the 2 lives that had been separate, and were now, by evidence and argument, and the slow, honest work of 2 people who had earned each other, joined. She took his hand. She held it the way she held everything that mattered, firmly, deliberately, and without any intention of letting go. The August evening went on around them, warm and unhurried, and entirely indifferent to whether any of it had been practical, and the answer they had both concluded was that it had been. Just not in the way she had told herself in April. The best investments, her father had always said, were the ones you understood better after you had made them than before. She understood this one completely.